you just have a look at the world right now and the size of the African continent, how young the continent is, where every other country is developed, we are the next best thing for the next 30 years.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to episode 10 of the Parallels podcast. The Parallels podcast is an African business podcast brought to you by Africa Scotland Business Network. ASBN, as we're fondly known, is a thriving international cross-sectoral business network, and the Parallels podcast brings you the leaders and CEOs of our member companies from across the globe. In episode 10, we can't wait to introduce you to the wonderful Max Pichulik of Impact Amplifier. Max has an investment banker background. Max is the co-founder and partner of Impact Amplifier, a leading social impact investment company across Africa. Max, welcome to the studio. How are you doing?
I'm great, Claire. Wonderful to see you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, before we get into this interview, I just want to share with the audience, if you're listening or watching, Max is actually my former boss. He'll be the first person to tell you that I was probably a hardworking employee. I was open to learning. It's where I got my event management career off the ground, and I learned so much from Max back in the day. That was 15 years ago, can you believe it? So I've known Max a very, very long time. You're someone that's very dear to me. And I'm absolutely delighted that Max has made a business decision to become part of Africa Scotland Business Network. Max has been a member of ASBN for the past couple of years. So Max, please share with us a little bit of background on Max Pichulik and Impact Amplifier.
Thanks, Claire. Before I get there, you were also fondly known as Firecracker back in the day, due to the incessant energy that you have, and wonderful energy. But thank you for having me today. Yeah, so my background is born and raised South African in Johannesburg. Grew up in the northern suburbs, sort of towards the end of apartheid. Our family had a change. My parents got divorced. My father got together with a partner in Soweto. I've got two mixed-race brothers, so I was very much born in a mixed-race family in South Africa, which I think has really much steered the rudder of where my career's gone, my movements, my ambitions. And I finished school in Johannesburg, studied in Cape Town, did a business science degree, and then ended up living in London, and found myself working firstly in business and corporate banking, and eventually in asset management. And then, as luck had it, I started or co-founded a non-profit with a Ugandan who was a friend of mine, a next-door neighbor. And I found myself being fascinated by business solutions to social environmental problems. And in 2005, my brother passed away, and a whole bunch of dynamics kind of brought me back to South Africa. I found myself running the family business for a while, and with a good part of my time, started volunteering in the mid-2000s for nonprofits, and really started thinking about what would a venture capital or venture approach be to solving social environmental issues. I then started and co-founded the first social enterprise incubator on the continent at the time, which is where I met you, and then in 2011 started Impact Amplifier.
Fantastic, Max. And can you share with us what Impact Amplifier actually does?
So we have three major pillars. The core of the business is finding, accelerating and financing what we think are the most innovative approaches to tackling social environmental issues on the continent. And those would typically be startups, for-profits, non-profits, hybrid organizations. They could have been spun out of a non-profit. It could be an entrepreneur starting something. It could have been spun out of a corporate, even a parastatal. So the sources of innovation are varied, but they all have some sort of tradable product or service, and they're all very much, in a very deep sense, trying to tackle a social environmental issue. So that practice, what we call the acceleration side of our business, is very much the core. And our work there traditionally was helping those businesses get ready for capital. Then we also have a separate practice that is about impact strategy, measurement, and management. So how do you measure impact? How do you manage that impact over a longitudinal time period, and how do you strategize with that? And that tends to be a solution for larger organizations and multinationals. And then the third piece is really our investing piece, and quite recently we're getting our license from the FSCA to start managing capital. And although we've been deploying lots of grants and concessionary capital across the continent, we have the ambitions of managing multiple debt funds. And this is quite interesting for us, because if we look at what we call the social economy, typically many of these organizations would be typically raising grants only, and many of them who do not have shareholders, do not run for-profits, can't raise equity. So debt brings a new instrument into the social environmental economy, which we're going to be innovating with, and it also stretches us not just in South Africa, but through our office in Lagos and Nigeria, and hopefully we can be deploying capital in 17 countries like we do currently with the grants we deploy.
Max, I always knew that you were a born leader, and I always knew that you would go on and do great things. So you started Impact Amplifier from South Africa. Can you just help us understand, how did you take your business up into Africa? Did you have a strategy, or was it more through partnerships? Like, how did you actually, what was that journey for you?
I would say it's organic. We always had the ambition to be a Pan-African organization. Very much, I think almost from inception, we found one of our clients, Nando's, who's a South African multinational. It was quite organic. One of our very first clients was Nando's, and we helped them set up a smallholder supply chain of farmers growing chili in Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique. And immediately, and that was from 2010, 2011, that gave us a footprint in Southern Africa. And from that point onwards, we very much looked at our organization as a Pan-African organization, not as a South African organization. And I would say that's stayed pretty much similar throughout our history, in that probably about only 30 to 40% of our work is in South Africa, which is large and meaningful, but we very much have a Pan-African view. And I think that view that we have operating across the continent also positively influences our work in South Africa.
Is there a case study, Max, that embodies exactly what Impact Amplifier does, or perhaps a case study or a project or a client that stands out to you that makes you really, really proud of your achievement with them? I'm sure there's many.
I get this question quite a lot, but I almost feel that my ambitions are greater than what I achieved. So when I look at my own work, the scale of the work that we're operating at, I wish we were operating at far greater scale. But I think Nando's on the impact measurement and management side is a really good example of helping and supporting a multinational to become more ethical, more inclusive, and more impactful, and deciding to work with thousands of smallholder farmers across Africa to grow chili, which becomes part of a spice pack, which becomes part of their peri-peri sauce, is definitely a piece of work that I think we're very, very proud of. And it's had a very, very positive influence on smallholder farmer incomes. And because if you think of smallholder farmers, typically these families in Southern Africa are earning $1 or less per day. And if you can shift that dynamic and double or triple their incomes, their net incomes, the influence that you have on their access to education, health, housing, electricity, sewerage is just profound. So I think that stands out as one of our great achievements. If I think of portfolio companies that we've supported across the continent, I think a great example would be a piece of funding we deployed into an organization called Pelebox. It's an IoT company based in South Africa. They were really trying to innovate around the long queues you find at primary clinics, and they developed a cold storage box that they could deploy at clinics. And clinicians, if you had families or individuals coming in for their chronic meds, instead of lining up in queues and spending a whole day from work, they would get an SMS and pick up their chronic meds right there and then. So that organization, when we found them, I think they had about 1 or 2 boxes out, and by the time we ended working with them, they were somewhere between 60 to 80 across. So their scale is massive, but there really are too many to speak of, because we're deploying anywhere between $4 and $6 million a year into a variety of social innovations. And we recently also have taken and created a dedicated team just to climate adaptation, circular economy innovations, and climate technology. And there's going to be a fund that we're going to be launching pretty soon from that.
So Africa, it's no secret, it's a continent of vast opportunity, but on the other side of the coin, it's also a continent of vast social and economic need. And I'm sure your work is making so much impact now across the continent, Max. But how do you choose your projects? What does that look like? Do they just come to you through email, or do you actively choose who and where you work?
Yeah, so over the last 10 years, I think across the continent, there's been an ecosystem of organizations that are either funding and supporting these entrepreneurs and these business models across the continent. And I think more so now than ever, if I compare my work now to 10 years ago, we're collaborating and partnering with that ecosystem. So our pipeline is generally generated through partnerships. And it tends to be that you can lever one project against the other. If you're running an agricultural program for a large organization where you're deploying capital into that part of the economy, that will find itself touching climate adaptation, renewable energy. So you tend to find there's this confluence of deals between agriculture, health, energy, and climate-related issues. And we spend a lot of our time in that sort of nexus of deal flow. So I think in this work, to be successful, you have to work in partnership with others. Because we don't have boots on the ground in each country, we only have boots on the ground in South Africa and in Nigeria and in multiple parts of Nigeria. Even if we're covering a different province in Nigeria, you would find yourself, you would find yourself lacking with deal flow. So yeah, every province or state in regions has you have differing access. So I think collaboration is core. I also think being around for long periods of time and building a network of people, as you mentioned in this podcast, I was your employer. And here you are today, and I think that stays the same. So if you're staying in the same line of work, your interns end up being your clients, your partners end up being all these relationships tend to galvanize over a period of time. And I think lastly, I think the ecosystem is getting more sophisticated, and organizations, these organizations didn't exist 10 years ago. So the ecosystem is an ecosystem of startups. I mean, ASBN wasn't around 5-6 years ago. So its sophistication in year 5 will be different to where it is in year 10 or 15. And it's that sophistication that's starting to mature on the continent now that I'm getting a good sense of. And with that, the different players are starting to understand their capabilities, the niches that they operate, the countries, the regions, and so are we. So we're not hyper-local. We operate virtually across many countries, and that has strengths, but it also has many weaknesses.
So many people think that doing business in Africa is like one thing, but actually, you know, we're sitting here in South Africa. It's very different to doing business or working in partnerships with people in Namibia next door. It's a completely different cultural, moral code, different language, and I'm sure you have to navigate that when you're taking Impact Amplifier out of South Africa with partnerships into Africa.
Well, I'm lucky being a South African where we have 11 different languages. So we're already such a diverse group of tribes, cultures, and ethnicities. And if you want to be successful in Africa, you have to think of navigating thousands of these different ethnicities in every locale that you go to. And they're just different in every single region, in every local economy, in every major city. And the cultural nuance between them also changes all the time. So if I'm honest with you, I've probably spent a lot of time bumping myself in the head of my own naivety of the continent permanently. Just permanently bumping my head. And I think once you start to see the nuances and you have 3 years, 5 years, 10 years of track history behind your name navigating that, I think that's when you start to see the ebbs and flows and you can navigate yourself a little bit better. And often having an in with a local partner provides you a gateway to doing a lot of this work. But walking in by oneself, trying to figure it out, and I think this is the mistake that the global north gets wrong all the time. But if you're born into this type of diversity and you're sensitive to it, like I've been also growing up in a mixed race family, then you can do that. But I'm also, my nature is I will step on toes naturally because it's in my nature as well. So I learn the hard way consistently.
Max, you said something in another answer about your vision and what you're doing in your projects currently isn't as big as your ambitions. And that's a classic entrepreneurial trait, isn't it? It's almost like we're never satisfied, even though you're clearly doing great things across the continent. On that note, what is the vision for Impact Amplifier?
Yeah, so over the next 5 years, I think we want to be able to deploy at least R1 billion in capital into social entrepreneurs across the continent. And the vision there is that we believe that socio-economic and ecological change doesn't actually occur from centralized governments or large multinationals. It's done by active citizenry, and that active citizenry happens through local entrepreneurs, and especially ones tackling social and environmental issues. So if you think of any corner of the continent where there's energy access issues, food security, health, environmental issues, all the business models and the innovations, I think, can plug into government. But what we need is a very diverse base of innovations operating across the continent, and all of them need capital, and on multiple levels. And that's not just grant money, it's not just debt, it's equity. So I think the vision for us is to bring what we call a new capital structure for social environmental change, that there are these financial instruments available to these social entrepreneurs across the continent, regardless of the local currency that they operate in.
Do you think there's a bit of social entrepreneur in all of us who are owning businesses? I started a business because I wanted to make a difference. I wouldn't call my businesses a social enterprise per se, but they were definitely born because I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And I know that sounds completely cliche, but Firecracker, we're holding spaces through events and producing marketing campaigns that communicate really positive things to people. And then, of course, we're sitting here because of Africa Scotland Business Network. And my way of making an impact is using my skill of connecting humans and, again, holding the space for different humans, not just in South Africa, but across borders into Africa. And now we're all over EMEA. And maybe that there is a little bit of a a social tangent involved in that without me even recognizing it.
Absolutely. I think often organizations like yourself, they're difficult because your work is often abstract in connecting. It's not like you're providing a direct product or service to a low-income customer. But I think on a wider lens, we only have 70, 80 years if we're lucky on this planet. And I think ultimately when we're spending 8 to 10 hours a day working, we want to find what we're doing is meaningful. And meaning can take so many diverse ways, shapes, and forms. And some of the work that's meaningful can galvanize certain parts of the population that are excluded to such big degrees. And I think our work is looking at the broad spectrum of meaning and trying to find very particular capital allocation decisions that are made to those very specific entrepreneurs. And I think for any entrepreneur that's going to wake up every single morning and be in an insecure environment from an income standpoint and start something, there's something that has to drive them that provides that meaning. And because ultimately that's what they're hanging on for. They're hanging on that meaning when things are not working. And I think that's probably the key ethos of any form of entrepreneurial activity. It's only that social entrepreneurs tackle something slightly different. They're often tackling human pain and suffering. So you're in the business of providing a product or service that alleviates human suffering. And that has another dimension of difficulty that I think is not accommodated in the entrepreneurship sector.
Can we flip the coin, Max, to the other side? NGOs. Do you think what you're doing in social impact investment is the new landscape for good organisations like NGOs? Is that where NGOs need to move? Or do you think that they're not mutually exclusive, but we still need NGOs in our landscape?
Yes, I'm trying to really break that idea that doing good is only in the realm of non-profits and making money is only in the realm of for-profits, that actually you can have any organizational and institutional structure that can solve social environmental issues. It can be for-profit, it can be hybrid, it can be both, it can be non-profit. The organizational structure is less. It's more the problem you're tackling and the business model and the unit economics behind it makes it sustainable. That's important. So one, it's driven by the vision and the intent, not necessarily the organizational structure. But I think practically what we will be bringing to nonprofits and NGOs, because many of them are actually looking to become more economically sustainable. They know that grants and donations will only get their impact so far, and that they actually need to start trading goods and services. And if they start trading in the market, they potentially could take other financial instruments like debt and repay that debt. And what that means for investors from our end is we're creating an alternative to philanthropy, which I think is much needed on the continent.
Max, you seem like a really busy guy. You are a really busy guy.
I've got 2 kids.
You've got, well, that was related to my next question. And I think
2 boys.
Yeah. I've got a pigeon pair, so I'm nearly there, but 2 boys, woof. And I think it's a really important question to pose to businessmen. Yeah. You know, how do you balance being a father, being a husband to Ksenia, and running a growing company?
Yeah, I mean, both my wife and I are entrepreneurs, as you know. So everything is about juggling balls. And I think as I'm maturing and I'm getting older, the foundation for me is my own health and well-being. And if I have that foundation, I can be a great husband, a great dad, a better entrepreneur. But at the end of the day, with young children, I've also had to realize that I'm going to be a little bit of a mediocre entrepreneur in the time that my kids are young, because I also want to be a father. And that as they grow up, those timelines and those issues can be rebalanced. And I've had to just realize, and I think something we've been sold that's completely inappropriate, is you can't be everything all at once.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, I'm also a mother now as well. I've also got 2 young children and a husband, and it is this like constant balance and juggling, and okay, you pick up the kids, I'll stay in the office, and then when, you know, my husband is up, I'm maybe down, and when he's down, I'm maybe up. So it is this like complex system that we have to navigate as entrepreneurs and as family people, right?
Yeah. And this word of resilience is often overused, but to be able to deal with the complexities and intensity of life, when you have to look after yourself to make yourself happy, you have to look after your relationship with your partner to make yourself happy, you have to monitor the relationship with your kids, your business partner. Those are very dynamic balls that are always shifting and moving at the same time, and you're tweaking one over here, but it comes at the cost over there. And it's, I think, a forever dynamic movement that we're all having to learn. And I think, you know, what I'm learning as I'm getting older is the more time I have to myself and peace time, the more I can actually give. But then I can't have too much of that either. So it is what it is.
Rest.
Quiet.
Solitude. I get my solitude in my car in the Africa Scotland Business Network.
In your garage when you get home.
my vehicle and the garage. Max, what excites you about Africa?
It's a good question. What excites me? Look, I mean, if you just have a look at the world right now, and the size of the African continent, how young the continent is, where every other country is developed, we are the next best thing for the next 30 years. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but we are it. This is the place of growth and productivity, and this is where food is going to be coming from. This is where the East is going to outsource their production as they become middle income countries. So we're ripe at this moment in time to be, I think, yielding huge productivity growth. And if I think about my children, where would I want them to be over the next 30 years? It's not Europe or the US. It's here. It's on the continent. And I think that's very, very exciting, because I don't think I thought about that way 10 years ago. But I see it very, 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 very clearly. And no doubt the development trajectory of the world, we are going to become the factory of the world at some point. But with that comes a huge responsibility that we do that correctly. So I feel very positive about the continent.
Max, thanks so much for being on the Parallels podcast with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I just want to say, I want to put it on the record. Thanks for everything that you've taught me in life, that you've given me, from employment to helping me flourish to being my own person and my own entrepreneur. I'm forever grateful to you.
Pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for tuning in to episode 10 of the Parallels podcast. Stay connected with us. It's brought to you by Africa Scotland Business Network. And if you want to reach out to Max or anyone in his team from Impact Amplifier, or indeed any one of our 100+ companies across EMEA, our website is www.africascotland.network. And don't forget to subscribe to the Parallels podcast while you're here. Stay warm. We're tuning in from Cape Town winter here, ladies and gentlemen, and stay connected. Take care.